The Utah Jazz have really surprised me, and I think a lot of people are going to be surprised about how much regression they made from last season to this season. How's it going, everyone? And welcome back to the Howdy Hoopers pod. Today we're going to talk about the Utah Jazz, and a lot of times I have a script or different things I want to talk about. But for this one, I kind of just want to talk about the Jazz and what I saw in the preseason, different players, and how the Jazz are going to exceed a lot of expectations. A lot of podcasts and a lot of people I hear talk about the Utah Jazz. They didn't really watch the Jazz last year. They didn't really know the circumstances that the Jazz were in and just saw that they only won 17 games and kind of just went on from there. When they didn't take into account that the Jazz were literally tanking, were sitting out 2 to 3 starters every single game. And I don't think they realize, how much young talent this team has. A lot of great role players on this team and potential maybe even all-stars are on this team right now. A lot of people, when I hear them talk about it, they're talking about how the Utah Jazz are in this island and they have no direction. They're missing so many pieces and they're going to be bad for so long. And even last year when I was watching this team and I watched them lose, 60 games or however many games they lost, I thought about how, we're one piece away. And, Ace Bailey might be that piece. There might be other players that are that piece. But I think the Jazz now are one piece away from being able to build a team, maybe similar to OKC or the talent the Houston Rockets have. All these different younger teams that we're now seeing come up. I think the Jazz are following the same blueprint. I think they're falling maybe closer to the San Antonio Spurs. The Spurs had a lot of young talent on that team. And, you saw them go from being one of the worst teams in the league and a lot of people being down on them to drafting Victor Wembanyama. And all of a sudden this team is, one of the best young cores in the entire NBA. And I think that's how the Jazz and a lot of people are going to look at the Jazz. They're not going to realize how close the Jazz are until they draft AJ DeBonso or one of the Boozer twins or one of the top people in this next draft that could really, really change their team. I think this next draft is so loaded that even if they end up with, the 5th pick again, that they can still get that player that can be, their key piece going forward. But there are a lot of players I want to talk about that are currently on the roster as well. And I think a lot of people are going to be pleasantly surprised. I was surprised to see how much people, have taken notice to Sensabaugh, and I didn't realize how big of a following Bryce had. A lot of podcasters, a lot of YouTubers I listen to are really, really high on Bryce. And I mean, they have every right to be that way. And when Bryce was first a rookie, when he came onto this team, my initial thoughts was, this is going to be the new Jordan Clarkson. He's going to be the player that comes off the bench and can put up 30 points a night, or he could be someone that comes in and has an off night and he just gives you, 10 points on 10 shots. And I'm still not sure if exactly what his role is, but he's definitely changed my mind. I made a video probably about a month ago about the Jazz, and I talked about how, he's going to be the 6th man, and I'm not sure if he's going to be the 6th man this year or if he's going to be starting. We saw him come off the bench every game in preseason, and we saw him have a lot of really, really good performances. We saw exactly why a lot of people are high on him, but I'm not sure if he's, a Cam Thomas or if he's, a James Harden. And I think a lot of people think he's got like a James Harden, maybe not to that quite that level, but the scoring ability of someone like that, when in reality it might be more closer to like Cam Thomas. And we saw this year, this offseason, Cam Thomas really had a hard time getting a contract because he thought he was worth more than he was. He's averaging 25 points per game, which is, pretty hard to do in the NBA. But they didn't see him. The Brooklyn Nets did not see him as, a star player, their key piece to build around, and were really trying to get him on a lower deal than what he was expecting. And I'm somewhere in between. I don't know if he's, going to fall into that realm or if he's going to be, a Jordan Clarkson or if he's going to be the next James Harden. That's one thing that's really exciting about this team. There are a lot of players on this team that, they have potential, they have really high ceilings, but even if they don't, reach the high ceilings that they potentially have, they have a really, really high floors and can be really good role players for this Jazz team that could end up with, the first overall pick or one of the higher picks in this next coming draft with a lot of loaded talent. But in my last video, I'm going to talk about, who I thought the starting lineup was and then now what I think the potential starting lineup could be. One thing I did say, and I know it's been kind of hard because a lot of our starters have been hurt, I said that I wanted to see the triple big lineup. And I know this sounds weird. We see like the Rockets running a double big, but our triple big lineup would be, super, super athletic. Because we'd have, Kessler running the center, and he's more of a traditional defensive center. And I think we'll see him have a really good season this year. We'll see him, improve upon, the last couple of years he's had with the Jazz, where he bounced back last year. But I think he'll be even better this year, going into a contract year. I'm not quite sure why the Jazz didn't give him a contract extension. They did something similar with Hayward, where they were basically like, go get the money and we'll match it. And I feel like that kind of hurts relationships. You got to find a happy medium of making the player happy, but also not overpaying him. I think we're seeing a lot of teams, trying to find the value of their team and their players so they don't go over the second apron. We used to see players that showed any promise, off their rookie extension, they just get a rookie max. And we're not seeing that anymore. We're seeing players like, Cam Thomas, like I talked about, Kuminga, or different players like we even saw got signed today. We're signing, what would have been before a max contract. They're now signing, a contract for $25 million, which I feel like is the new, magic number for those players that, they haven't proven themselves yet, but they're also going to be a really good role player. And I think it would have been better to do something like that with Kessler, give him $20 million, do a 5-year, $120 million contract, which would be, about 11 to 10% of the cap, which is pretty good for a starter. That's a pretty good level for someone of his caliber. But sorry, I got a little off track, but I want to see Kessler, Markkanen, and Filipowski in that starting lineup. And we saw that in the last preseason game, and I thought it worked really well. We saw the pace was completely different. We saw how effective it was, and we won the game. And I know it wasn't because of them, because they sat out all the starters sat out, the majority of the second half like they do in the preseason. But I felt like the moments when they were on the court together, it was really, really exciting, and it made me excited. It made me really, really excited. Like, I'm excited for the season start, but once I saw that actually being played, I was like, man, this is actually going to be so much more enjoyable than last season. And then I talked about how I wanted Ace Bailey to run the 2. I thought him running the 2 would be beneficial for his growth, having him have the ball in his hands more, be able to dribble more. He doesn't have the best handle, but I think this year could be a year where, we put the ball in his hands quite a bit and make him dribble, make him learn, push him to be a better playmaker. And I think that could help his progression, kind of like what we're seeing with the Mavericks running Cooper Flagg at the point guard. But that's where my problem is. If we run him at the 2, then there's no room to start Bryce Sensabaugh because he's not a point guard. And we're kind of in a weird situation. I talked about that, how I wanted those 4, and then I thought that, Collier was going to start out being the point guard at the beginning of the season, and then I thought Walter Clayton Jr. was going to take it, midway through the season. And I know a lot of people are really, really high on Walter Clayton, and we didn't get to see Collier play in the preseason, but I'm not as high on Walter Clayton as, most people are. I think a lot of people are, really, really excited about him. He came off a great run. He showed promise in, the summer league. I thought he showed, lots of potential in the summer league. But in the preseason, I don't know. He was making the passes, but I feel like the passes were not, the type of passes that Markkanen wanted. He was finding them, but it wasn't finding them, nearly as quick. He was dribbling the ball too much. He was pulling up for threes too early in the shot clock. And I know that's okay, especially on a team that's, trying to figure out, trying to develop young players. But I think with him being older and him coming in more NBA ready because he is older, I feel like players like that, their ceilings usually aren't as high. Their floors are higher than, an 18-year-old that comes in and you're not too sure about him. When a player has played as long as he did in college and has proven themselves, they have a higher floor, but their ceiling is a lot lower, because he's already, in his 22, I don't know his exact age. I'm guessing he's probably about 21, 22. And, someone like Ace Bailey that's coming in that's 18 years old, he has a lot more time to grow and has a lot more time to be able to progress, be in the NBA, and obviously he's drafted higher. But I think I'm just not as high on him, and I don't think he's going to start this season unless there's injuries. but I did not anticipate Keontae George making the jump that he did. I thought Keontae was going to be, a player off the bench. I thought he might be the odd man out. Once this team starts coming together, I thought he might be the one out. But now, with how much he improved and the leadership he's shown, maybe he's the starter. I don't know. Maybe Collier starts out the season starting, or Keontae does because he had such a good preseason. But I think Collier will start out if he's not injured. But I think he better watch out because Keontae might come out and take that starting spot. I just don't know what to expect from Collier in the summer league. I felt like he was very lazy, very sloppy, and it almost seemed like he thought that he was, a little too good to be there or was getting too comfortable after having such a good rookie season, and it was one of the few bright spots for the Jazz last year. But with that starting lineup in mind, we would have, Kessler at 7 foot, Markkanen at 7 foot. We'd have Filipowski. They have him listed at 6'10", but I'm going to say 7 foot. 3 7-footers in the starting lineup. And we've seen this work with the Cavs with Markkanen on that team. They ran this similar triple big lineup. And then having, Ace Bailey, who's 6'8". And then if it's Keontae George, they probably have him listed around 6'2", somewhere around that, but he's probably a little smaller than that, and his frame makes him seem even smaller. But that is a pretty big starting lineup. That compares to the Houston Rockets starting lineup where, they have Amen Thompson starting out as their point guard and then Kevin Durant as their shooting guard. We have similar, height and skill of these taller players as a team like the Houston Rockets, and it might catch a lot of teams for surprise. And I think, the Rockets and Thunder are playing right now. This is kind of an off tangent, but the Rockets are playing super, super well against the defending champs, the team that probably has the best roster construction in the entire NBA. And the reason is because, they're bigger and they're stronger in almost every single position. I know Chet Holmgren's a great defender, but he's just not as big as their centers. Şengün and Adams are way bigger than him with his small frame, which makes it easier for him to get offensive rebounds. And I think we'll see something similar with the Jazz. They're going to get a lot of offensive rebounds. They're going to be really athletic and be able to outrun the teams that are trying to run the double bigs. Kessler, he's faster than Şengün, or about the same speed as Şengün, but Markkanen and Filipowski are a lot faster than Adams. So it's going to be interesting to see how this works out, but this really, really tall lineup was exactly what I was hoping for, but I just really wish there was a spot where we could fit in, Sensabaugh into the starting lineup, but I think he might just be our Jordan Clarkson for this season. He might come in, average, 18 points per game off the bench, and, maybe that's going to be his role for the rest of his career, or maybe he makes that jump and is, the all-star level player, a 3-level scorer that primarily works in the mid-range, but also has a great three-pointer. But I just don't know. We have so much talent, young talent in different positions, but there always has to be an odd man out. And also with us bringing in, potentially another player, super high pick next year, I'm worried that we might trade Markkanen and go all in on the younger players. But I would love to see it. Like, say we got AJ Debonsa, Filipowski might have to move to the bench, or they might just have Kessler go to the bench and then, run all these super, super athletic bigs. But I honestly think the Jazz are in a lot better situation than most people think. They're going to win more games than they did last year, as long as they let them play. I'm sick of seeing our starters, sit out for, different injuries. And once one of them comes back, randomly another starter gets injured, but we didn't see it happen in the game. So as long as that happens, I know Austin Ainge talked about how they're not doing that this season. I really hope they stand true to that. I think the Jazz will be much better than last year. There were some games that were pretty hard to watch, but this year our offense is going to be much better. With our height, I'm hoping our defense is better, but I'm really, really excited for this season. I think they're going to surprise a lot of people, but I want to hear what you guys have to think, especially if you're not a Jazz fan. I want to hear what you think as, an outsider, and you most likely probably didn't watch a lot of Jazz games last year. Maybe you didn't watch any Jazz games just because, that's what a lot of people did with teams that aren't good. You usually don't watch them as much. You rather turn on, the Lakers versus the Warriors or the bigger games every single night like that. But I also want to hear the perspective of Jazz fans, on a scale of 1 to 10, how excited you are. I'd have to say like a 9 out of 10. I'm pretty excited. But also we'll see, it might be super exciting for the first 10, 15 games, then sizzle out. But regardless, I think we have a lot of young talent. We should feel very optimistic about how it's going to go, especially this season and the next couple seasons to come, and see how these players progress. But I want to hear what your guys' take is, who you guys think should start, and if you're as high on Bryce Sensabaugh as a lot of other people are. But I appreciate you guys checking out this video. If you made it this far, make sure to drop a like and drop a team or player I should talk about next. But I'll catch you guys in the next video.